Hi, in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about my original signal compression scheme. And to do that, let me take you back to a classic compression scheme that's used in the Boss CS, compressor sustainer pedals. Now, in this image we can see classic compression scheme. We have the input level versus the output level on the graph. We can see here a threshold level point. And the threshold level point is where the ratio of input signal to the output signal changes. Below the threshold point, there's a one-to-one correspondence between the input signal and the output signal, which is if the input signal is 2 volts, the output signal is 2 volts. The input signal is 3 volts, the output signal is 3 volts. Above the threshold voltage, things begin to change. And in the classic compressors, the compression ratio, there's only one change of compression ratio. It changes from 1-to-1 to something else, but that something else is set. It could be 2-to-1, it could be 4-to-1, it could be 8-to-1. I believe the compressed Boss CS2 was running around 4-to-1 or 6-to-1. So above a certain level, then say if an increase of say 6 volts above the threshold would only result in an increase of the output signal rising by 1 volt. I want to keep it light in this, so that's all I'm going to say about the classic compression scheme here, except that the compression ratio could be anything. Once you get up to a compression ratio of about 16-to-1, the effect stops being considered a compressor and starts being considered a limiter. So there's the division between a compressor and a limiter is the degree of compression, the compression ratio used. Okay, moving on. When I started looking into creating what I would consider to be a better compressor, after a good while of thought, the best thing I could come up with was something called a continuous curve compression, which eliminates a problem in the classic scheme, and that is right where the threshold level was, there's a sharp bend in the response of the effect, and that's called the knee of the compressor. Now there's been a sharp knee, as was in the last diagram. People tend to be able to hear it when the compressor kicks in, and it can be annoying. So in order to minimize the effect of the knee upon the quality of the tone of the compressor, the best way to go about this is continuous curve compression. Continuous curve compression, there is no angle. It's a continuously variable curve that goes from 1-to-1 to horizontal, which would be considered an infinite to 1 compression ratio. And I developed a way to do this, but it required a digital effect and digital sampling and a microcontroller, and the microcontroller had to run at least 96 kilohertz for a sampling rate, and then it had to do a bunch of mathematical steps to implement my transcendental function for continuous curve compression. And though it was possible, it just required an expensive microcontroller that was capable of doing much more, had many more other features built into the thing than I needed, just because it was fast enough to do what I needed to do. So that kind of put a damper on pursuing that any farther. And then a little while later, I figured that I could approximate a continuous curve compression with a number of compression ratios. And that brought me to this. This is the method I've used to construct my compressor. This is an analog 6-step approximation of continuous curve compression. So these ratios shown here are not the actual ones I use in a compressor. These are just for illustration. So like in the classic compression, we have a 1-to-1 ratio up to a threshold level, and then we have a change to a new compression ratio, say 2-to-1 in the example, up to a secondary threshold level, and there the compression level changes to another ratio, 3-to-1 in this illustration, which again repeats for a while up to a third threshold level, and then the compression ratio changes once again to 4-to-1. So you see here each segment, although each segment here of each new compression ratio is a straight line, by using 6 of these straight lines, the overall shift is very smooth, and the 6 segments approximate a curve. And it's this approximation of a curve that makes it much less audible, if audible at all, that this is using 6 steps of what you might call linear compression to approximate a continuous curve compression. So that's the short of how my compressor works. And it won't sound like a compressor sustainer 2 and Ibanez. They tend to breathe. They have a finite attack time and release time. In my compression scheme, the compression happens instantaneously. The Ibanez compressors, what they do is they keep track of an average signal level, and then they switch into compression mode as that average signal level gets past a threshold point. In contrast to that, my compressor only pays attention to the instantaneous signal level, and the application of compression and release of compression happens instantaneously. So it's going to sound a little different from those compressors, and therefore the application of my compressor will be a little different. As it stands now, without having yet built this circuit and listened to it, I expect that it's going to work better for, say, acoustic guitars or even vocals than for electric guitars, or at least for electric guitars as the old classic compressors were used. So maybe people will even find a new use for this. Alright, there you go. That's the short of Fred B's original compressor scheme.